Hello and welcome to the first lecture on functional level strategies. Before we get into the lecture, a few housekeeping things. Just as a reminder, Quiz 6 is going to be due at 5 p.m. on Friday of this week. Also want you guys to have on your radar that the first exam is going to be due at 5 p.m. A week from this Thursday, so that's February 28th. We won't have any lectures next week. Next Tuesday's lecture, in lieu of a lecture, I'll have a study guide available to y'all, and would be more than happy to have a review session if that's something folks would like to have. Maybe if that's something you're interested in, we can have that discussion on the student lobby forum. The exam is going to be on as you learn, and so. Rather than trying to trick it and make it more difficult, I'm just going to go ahead and say that I fully anticipate and expect that this will be an open note, open book exam. You'll even be able to take this exam with your friends. Now, keep in mind that I'm going to be pulling questions from a question bank, so your exam is unlikely to look like your friend's exam. And so, while you can take it together, you'll still need to be able to do your own work. And you'll also have 75 minutes to take the exam. So I think I opened the exam at 9 a.m. On Thursday, and you'll have until 5 p.m. to take it. But it'll take you about 75 minutes to complete the exam. So once you start, you'll have that countdown timer going on. There's going to be 40 multiple choice true-false questions that, again, will come from a question bank, very similar to the quizzes, weekly quizzes you guys have been doing, so there shouldn't be any surprises there. And then I'll also have 5 short essay questions that you'll need to answer. So an hour and 15 minutes, you'll have to do this at a pretty quick pace. So even though this is open note, open book, I don't anticipate that you're going to have very much time to look up questions that you don't know the answer to. So it would be best to prepare and review for this exam. We'll talk a little bit more about the exam next week, but if there are any questions, please feel free to post them. And again, let's try and use the question lobby forum for those, so the answers get out to the whole group. Had a conversation with the face-to-face class, and their preference was for me to have a study guide made for them rather than having the cases graded before spring break. So unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to do a study guide and have the cases graded. But hopefully my comments on Friday on the announcement were helpful, and I think overall I'm quite pleased with where we're starting out here with the cases, and my goal is at the end for these case analyses to be something that you're quite proud of, and something that you could include in a portfolio for a job interview. So I do have high expectations for these, but I think given the work and effort that I saw on the first cases, that I think we'll be able to get there. So I thank all of you for your hard work, and look forward to spending some time looking at the reports here over the next week or so. So that's all the housekeeping things that I have. Just to go over today's lecture, we're going to review this idea of value capture and value creation, this way of increasing the area of the blue box. Then we're going to look at some functional level strategies that you can use in order to create a bigger area in the blue box. Specifically, we're going to be talking about efficiency, and efficiency in different functional areas, so how you can be more efficient in different functional areas, as well as how different functional areas affect firm level efficiency. And then we'll talk about superior quality, both quality as reliability and quality as excellence. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I have already shared this figure, And I think, maybe this figure is quite possibly the most important thing for you to gain from this class in understanding what's going on here. Because I think in many ways when we think about strategy, it really boils back down to this figure here. So we can understand the value that's added by a product or service as this first column here on the far left. And total value is made up of two parts. It's got the economic value created and the firm's cost. So the firm's costs are the input costs, how much it costs you to make something. And the idea is that any firm is going to put in work, put in effort with resources, and that work and effort is going to lead to something that's more valuable than the cost of the products and services that went into it. So that's the value that is created. Now that just got interrupted there, so let's get back to this. So the economic value that's created. Now the economic value that's created is split up into two groups or two areas. So there's the value that consumers gain or outside stakeholders gain, and then there's firm profits. And the firm profits and consumer value surplus is going to differ or change based on where you set your price. So these basic elements, what we can think about, if our goal is to increase that light blue firm profit area, there are three ways in which we can do that. So the first is increasing overall value that's created. So if more value is being created, there's more available to be captured. And an example of this is the additional value that email communication offers in comparison to faxes. There's more opportunity for firms to capture value because the total value that's being created has increased. Another way is through decreasing costs. So if the value to the consumer remains unchanged, there's more area that can be captured by the producer. So if you keep prices the same and the value to the consumer doesn't change, so you don't cut back on cost cutting in ways that negatively affect how much the consumer values the product, there's more of that area under the line and under the price line and above your cost line that can go back to the firm. Alternatively, if you decrease costs in such a way that lowers the price, you're able to sell more products, and so you can have more sales and spread your fixed costs out across a larger volume of sales. And the best example of that is Walmart, who's been able to extend their low prices onto the consumers, attracting more consumers and generating profits that way. Alternatively, you can increase price. So if the value that's created remains the same, your costs remain the same, you can increase price, and that can increase the area of that light blue box. But that's more viable in monopolistic environments, as we talked about in the industry analysis. And so there's less opportunities in which you can raise price without either increasing consumer value or some way of differentiating your product. So now we talked in the last lecture that some of the ways in which you can either increase value is through superior quality, superior customer responsiveness, superior innovation, or superior efficiency, and some combination of these. And so these can either help you increase the value that's created or lower your costs, which allow you to gain more profits. So another way of thinking about it is if we've got that light blue box here in the center, these different strategies of quality, of efficiency, that these can either increase perceived value, so increasing total value, or decrease costs. And in decreasing costs, you're able to capture more profits. If we think about it functionally within kind of the strategy of a firm, we can see the way in which different functional strategies fits into developing the strategy of a firm, both with its inputs and outputs. So with that in mind, kind of thinking about those three areas, let's get into the different strategies. And the first one that the textbook talks about is efficiency. And efficiency we can define simply as measured by the quantity of inputs that it takes to produce a given output. So you can use less resources and get the same output. You can use the same amount of resources and have more output. Or you have some combination of using less resources and producing more output. So mathematically, we can think of efficiency as a function of outputs divided by inputs. And so the more outputs you have, keeping inputs constant, the greater your efficiency, or the fewer inputs you have, keeping outputs the same, the greater efficiency that you would have. So what are some of the ways in which you can achieve greater efficiency? And one of the earliest known understandings of efficiency came from this idea of economies of scale. And the economies of scale builds on the idea that you can have reductions in unit costs that are attributed to large outputs. So if you spread your fixed costs over a large production volume, you're able to benefit from these economies of scale. So the large output allows you to produce each individual unit more with fewer resources. Large outputs also lead to greater division of labor and specialization. If you have one individual performing the same task over and over again, they're going to be able to do that task more quickly than if they have to do multiple tasks. So we can think of the example of me working in my wood shop, and I'm building a chair. And I have to do all the parts of the chair. I have to cut the wood, I have to do all the gluing, all the clamping, and then I have to do the sanding, and then once I'm done with that, I have to do the staining. And in between each individual task, there's a setup period, there's a time in which I have to change tools, and all of that changing increases time. In contrast, if you have somebody on an assembly line who's only putting a dab of glue in one joint and then clamping, and they're doing that task over and over and over again, there's less change, there's less setup time, and so they're able to perform that task more efficiently than if one person tries to do all of the tasks. Now, something that's interesting to think about is economies of scale are a little bit different than economies of scope, which is a topic that we'll talk about later on in this semester. But when we're talking about economies of scale, we're talking about producing or performing the same function over and over again, and that the benefits that accrue from doing the same task over and over again, rather than the idea of doing lots of different tasks and the opportunities that emerge from multiple tasks. The other interesting thing about increasing or having a large output is that it negatively affects supplier and buyer powers. That if you are producing large volumes, that your ability for your supplier to have power over you reduces, and same with buyer powers. So there's some interesting reasons in which a firm might want to increase its scale. There's also some interesting things to think about with regards to transportation and this this container principle. The idea being that if you're transporting lots of items, that you're going to gain certain efficiencies by transporting in larger volumes than in smaller volumes. So we can think about this. If you are a large producer, that if you are shipping out to a buyer, that it's more efficient to have a big truck than to have a smaller truck. There's certain gains that you get from that larger output. But you also have to think about diseconomies of scale. So there is when you produce, when you do the same function in large volumes, that there's administrative costs and there's management challenges that you face, and these are typically what we can think of as bureaucracy or managerial inefficiencies. So instances in which the management of larger volume becomes challenging. And the interesting thing to think about is that you start to face diseconomies of scale anytime you go from 1 to 2. So there's always a management that occurs. There's always some congestion that is created when you're producing more than one. And so the diseconomies of scale, it's not like you have economies of scale and all of a sudden you have diseconomies of scale. What you have is you have different factors that make it more efficient to produce more, that are simultaneously occurring when you have factors that make it less efficient to produce more. And so that there's that tricky point in which you have to identify when do the costs begin to outweigh the benefits. And unfortunately, there's not a clear number, but at some point you can get too big, and that can cause problems for firms. Now, in addition to economies of scale, there's also learning effects, and this idea that any time that you learn how to do something, it's going to require less inputs for you to do that same thing again. Now, whether it's going to take less information, or you're going to be able to do it with less knowledge, or you're going to do it with less time, less energy, less resources, there are multiple ways in which learning allows you to perform the same task again more efficiently moving forward. And we see learning, as you might expect, being more significant when it's technologically complex. So, with simple tasks, there's less learning opportunities that can occur. And with more highly complex tasks, the benefits from learning will be quite large. But regardless of the complexity of the task, the learning effects diminish in importance over time. So as you learn how to do something, your ability to learn as much the next time is going to diminish. And so the more you do something, the less and less you're going to learn how to do it. And what's interesting is most tasks are mastered in 2 to 3 years. So you can think about an employee working at your firm that for most of the tasks, everything that they're going to be able to learn will max out at 2 to 3 years, after which point any new learning that occurs is offset by forgetting things that they already knew. And what's interesting is that even in the most complex tasks, so performing surgery or producing advanced accounting or designing buildings, the research has shown that really after 8 years, the benefits of learning have pretty much maxed out. So after 8 years, even for these highly complex tasks, there's as much forgetting as there is learning. And it has some interesting implications. We hear a lot about how teachers feel that their pay should increase with tenure, because the more that they've been teaching, the better they are at it. I think that the evidence would suggest that might not be as strong of a case, particularly after 4 or 5 years, as some people would have you believe. Something else that's interesting to think about is the way in which beginners, amateurs, and experts perform tasks differently. What we kind of know about beginners and amateurs is that they tend to be very rule-oriented. They tend to get flustered very easily when the rules of the game change slightly, in comparison to experts who operate much more on heuristics and kind of, they have a sense of what should be done, and that they're able to adapt more easily when there are slight modifications. That the expert, a lot of this, or some of this research was done with taxi drivers, and what they found were that expert taxi drivers, when there was an accident on the road, were able to quickly identify alternative routes to take their passengers. And they were able to do so much quicker than a automated type service. So it's kind of interesting how experts, even in this day and age of automation and artificial intelligence, that in many, many cases, experts still outperform automation and AI in a lot of situations. There's some interesting things there. There's also an expense, though, in getting someone to that expert level. And so that's a decision that firms have to make. Now, the textbook talks about this interesting idea of the ways in which economies of scale and learning interact. And what they argue is that there's an increase in accumulated volume output over time, that leads to both economies of scale and learning effects. And the suggestion would be that there's value in gaining market share that is gained through these economies of scale and learning. And so the suggestion would be that this is particularly valuable in industries that mass produce a standardized output. That if you're producing the same item over and over and over again, that there's incentives to do so on a large scale, and that doing so on a small scale is going to make efficiencies more difficult to benefit from. But that, this idea of mass scale is, kind of points at some of the limits of efficiency. One is this old dog liability, this idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And there's an interesting thing that happens, particularly at the expert level, called cognitive hardening. What we see is that because experts rely on heuristics and routines and patterns, that when routines and patterns have to change, that experts really struggle to make that adaptation. Changes are easily overlooked in these situations. And so, the example that we talked about a couple of weeks ago was with Polaroid having the digital photography technology, but that for its senior management, they had kind of developed this heuristic and this means of production of the camera film, and so that change was particularly difficult to overcome. There's also, as we talked about, the trade-offs between economies and diseconomies of scale, and making that decision about at what point are the diseconomies of scale, the cost of the diseconomies of scale, outweighing any of the benefits of the economies of scale. And then the other thing that's interesting is the benefits of experience and learning can quickly become obsolete with the introduction of new technologies. So, you can think about, for chauffeurs, at one point, in the 1920s, being able to change tires really quickly was a task that increased efficiency of driving. But with better technology tires and tires, not going flat as much, that efficiency is no longer of much value. And so things that at one time were quite important can become inimportant or unimportant very quickly. And then the other issue is the rising demand for personalized and unique products and services. That what we're seeing, particularly in the U.S. and European market, is that individuals want products and services that are unique to them. And in that case, there is a direct conflict with kind of our traditional understandings of economies of scale and learning and efficiency. So an approach that's been developed that addresses that is the flexible production and mass customization. And these are means of production that integrate adaptability into the production itself. This allows for both changes in the type and quantity of items that are produced. There are three main parts that we can think about. There's the equipment. So often this is computer numeric control tools. So these are tools that can be programmed in order to perform functions, and those programs can quickly be adjusted or changed to allow for alterations. Material handling systems. So obviously, if there's going to be any change in quality or type, you have to have a way of handling the different inputs for that, and then some central control. And the key part with the central control in this story is that you can see how this requires a great deal more skill than producing the same item over and over and over again. That the employees that are using some sort of flexible production or mass customization have to have greater expertise and greater knowledge than what was needed with the producing the same item over and over again. And that's posed some particular challenges for a number of manufacturing firms, in that they can't find the workers that are able to use these sorts of machines. But we're also seeing it in the service industry. We can think about the hospitality industry. And to give each guest a unique and personalized experience requires a high level of skill. A lot of hotels and restaurants struggle to find chefs and hotel staff that are able to manage that change, that fluctuation, in order to meet the same level of standard that was offered at the kind of mass-produced level. So, but the benefits of this strategy is that it reconciles the economies of scale and learning with product customization. So, if you get really good at using a computer numeric control system, then you're able to produce lots of different things, and so you've got that economies of scale and learning, but are also able to do customization. And there's an interesting argument or an interesting trend in which this mass customization, as more and more firms have been able to offer mass customization, there's been more and more demand for the customization. We see it clearly in our using various internet platforms, that when I go to Facebook, my Facebook page should look different than someone else's Facebook page. Even though that this is a mass-produced platform, each experience has to be unique in order for it to be valuable. Now, switching to marketing efficiencies. So one of the important things with marketing is to understand this customer defection rate, or these churn rates. And the idea is that the cost of selling to an existing customer is far less than the cost of gaining a new customer. So if you have high customer defection rates, what you're having to do is you're having to spend a lot of money attracting new customers. And by attracting new customers, that's not only the recognition and familiarity, but also the knowledge about your products, the trust between you and those customers, and then negotiating prices. If I've done business with someone many times, it's going to be very easy for us to draw up a contract together. Whereas if I'm doing business with someone for the first time, we're going to have to spend a lot more time negotiating the details of that contract. So, there are clearly some advantages to keeping existing customers rather than going out and finding new customers. That it's more efficient to sell to an existing customer than it is to sell to a new customer. Existing customers also help your marketing be more efficient because they're able to advertise your product and services through word and mouth. Through word of mouth. And this is more relevant in some industries than others. For example, in the tourism industry, we know that word of mouth is one of the most effective marketing strategies. And so having good customers, happy customers, allows your marketing to go farther. And the kind of the moral of the story is that it's better to focus on keeping existing customers than it is getting new ones. And so the trick is to identify who are the customers that are on the edge of defection and what can you do to keep them. So your happiest customers, they're happy with what you're doing. Your most dissatisfied customers, there's not a whole lot you can do to win them back, or if you do win them back, it's going to be so costly that it's not clear if it's worth it. But these customers that are on the edge, maybe with just a little bit of attention or a little bit of effort, you can win them back and keep those customers. So it's these customers on the edge that are the most interesting for a firm to keep. Now, another functional area is the supply chain, which is the managing the flow of inputs and components from suppliers into the company's production process. And this, we can think about it as a support function, and so it doesn't directly affect the value of a final product or service, but there are direct ways in which supply chains can increase efficiency. So the cost savings come from reducing waste, improving quality at the source. So making sure that you have good raw materials that you're working from, so that you don't have to throw away finished products at the end. Increasing inventory turnover. So this ability to use inventory more productively. Allows you to be more efficient, and reducing the need for working in fixed capital. So, as we talked about with small businesses, that many small businesses struggle with cash flows, and one of the ways to ease the pressure of cash flows is to reduce inventory, so have a more efficient supply chain. Now, one of the strategies to do this, or one of the kind of big ideas, is the just-in-time inventory system. The idea of economizing on inventory by scheduling components to arrive just as they enter the production process or as stocks are depleted. So, we can think of a restaurant that has a walk-in cooler, and you don't order more steak until you've used your last steak up. And so this idea that you only use products and services, you only keep products and services on your shelves, or raw materials on your shelves, as quickly as you can use them. And so ideally, what you would have is you wouldn't have any storage. You would be using products, you'd be using raw materials as soon as they arrive, and not holding on to them. Now, there are a lot of benefits to this. It reduces inventory stock, again, improves working capital turnover. It reduces the risk of spoilage. Again, in food service, the longer you keep produce on your walk-in, the less fresh it is. So if you've got more efficient just-in-time inventory management, you're able to use fresher products in what you're cooking. But some of the drawbacks, clearly, there's no buffer of stock inventory. So, going on with this restaurant example, if you've got a big group that comes in and everyone orders carrot soup, and you only have a limited amount of carrots in your walk-in cooler, there's a chance that you might miss out on a sale because you don't have that buffer of stock inventory. It also requires advanced planning. This is one of the big areas in which just-in-time inventory systems can completely fail, is that if you don't have an accurate prediction of when you're going to need various inputs, you can find yourself unable to produce anything. And so it requires a high level of advanced planning to know exactly when and how various raw materials are needed. And it also can inhibit flexibility in production. So if you've got this, very complex, system of when raw materials come, and all of a sudden you want to switch to a different direction, well, you've only got the inventory that's coming, and so you may not be able to take advantage of an opportunity that emerges unexpectedly because you don't have the inventory to take advantage of it. So there are some interesting advantages to just-in-time inventory management, but there are also some challenges, and so I think, particularly for small businesses, getting this right can be the difference between success and failure. Now, R&D is another area in which we can think about efficiency. So there's two ways in which we can think about R&D affecting efficiency. One is considering the production in the design phase. So, how efficient is this product to produce? So not only, is this product or service a good product or service, there's demand for it, but how difficult is it going to be for us to make it? So thinking about efficiency in the design phase. And then there's also, opportunities in which you can innovate in the process of production. So, can you think about, more efficient ways of producing the same items through various research? But I do want to kind of briefly touch on this idea of R&D and efficiency. Most firms engage in applied research. And so when we talk about applied research, we can think about it as answering a specific question or problem. And the outcomes of applied research are typically known. So, if I'm going to research, I work for DuPont, and I'm researching glue. I kind of know what I'm looking to research. I'm looking for a stronger glue, or I'm looking for a glue to dry faster. And so the outcome of what I'm looking for is already known. And typically, with applied research, these lead to incremental innovations. And what we mean by incremental innovations is that these are the kinds of innovations that change the story just a little bit. So it's a glue that dries a little bit faster, or a glue that's a little bit stronger. Rarely does applied research lead to kind of the groundbreaking advances that lead to whole new product categories. That kind of research tends to come from basic research. And basic research is aimed at understanding or expanding the knowledge and understanding of a phenomenon. So, basic research, using the glue example, basic research would be about understanding the physics of glue. New ways in which items, molecules bond to each other. And so the difference is the outcomes are often unknown at the beginning. So, I'm trying to understand the physics of gluing. And so I don't know where this line of inquiry is going to lead to. But basic research is often the source of new and unexpected innovations. So the kind of groundbreaking innovations that occur. And so firms are kind of put in this interesting question of, should they invest in applied research or should they invest in basic research? If they invest in applied research, they know that there's going to be some beneficial outcome that they can gain. So there is a kind of known ROI. Whereas with basic research, you can fund a project for 15, 20 years and have no commercial opportunities emerge from that research. And that's not something that firms can typically justify investing in. So how do you balance these two things? And what I would suggest is that there's some really interesting models that have emerged that help us answer this question. And one of the best examples, is Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, in which you have a clear partnership between private firms and a research institution working side by side. And so you have NC State engineers working alongside engineers from SAS on answering new kinds of questions. And so you have the applied research benefiting from the basic research that's occurring, and you have the basic research being benefiting from the applied side. So I would suggest that there are some interesting opportunities in which the private sector and research institutions can work together in order to lead to some very exciting advances in basic research while maintaining a focus on applied research. I think the other interesting thing for us to think about, or kind of political argument for us to think about, is research institutions, public universities, tend to be where basic research occurs. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the funding of basic research justifies the benefits of this funding of basic research justifies the high cost of doing so. And I think it's a difficult question to answer, and I'm not sure I have an answer for it. There are definitely some research projects that I see going on that I scratch my head and wonder why are taxpayer dollars being paid for that. But then there's some fascinating insights and innovations that occur at research institutions that I don't think any individual firm would have been able to identify on their own. So it is a balancing act between these two. But what I would say is one strategy that a lot of firms that are facing challenges do is they immediately cut R&D funding, in large part because that with any research there's some uncertainty, and the benefits of research are at a future time. And I think while there may be short-term gains from cutting research, I think that there are long-term costs that are difficult to recover from. Again, difficult choices that managers have to make. Another area of potential efficiency are information systems, and this has clearly been one of the most dramatic areas of focus in the last 30 years. So things like communication, database, analysis of data have all been possible thanks to information systems. And it's allowed for automation of a lot of the internal company activities. Payroll, benefits, hiring and employee records can all be done now through information systems. Inventory management, that at any point in time you can identify where in the production process an order is, and this allows you to communicate with customers more efficiently, but it also allows you to kind of analyze how long it takes for orders to go through and where are opportunities for greater efficiency. And then there's also all sorts of accounting benefits that accounting efficiencies that occur through information systems. But there are drawbacks, obviously. So one of the big ones that we've seen time and time again, and I don't think we're going to see end anytime soon, is this issue of security. That if you've got all of your records in a database, how do you secure that database from nefarious actors? And then the other thing is humans are social animals, and so while Philip at reception, a robot can easily do what Philip does. We can get an automated telephone that routes callers directly to who they need to be and records messages. That you've got a computer with a touch screen that when visitors come, they can notify who they're there to see. So why do we really need Philip there at the front desk? Well, I think part of it is that humans like to interact with other humans. We like to be welcomed by a friendly face when we're in a new place. That when we have a question, we want to talk to someone about our problem. And so there is some important questions to ask about the automation of all tasks in that, are we getting away from a welcoming environment for folks? So. Now, another area of efficiency is human resources, and it's interesting that for many years in management departments you had the strategy folks on one side, and then you had the organizational behavior and HR folks on the other side, and there was very little discussion across these two areas. But about 30 years ago, there was this recognition, both by strategy and HR scholars, that in order for functions to perform smoothly, you have to have the right workforce. So you have to have the right people with the right training and that are motivated at the right level in order to accomplish goals, and that there were strategic implications for various elements of human resources. So in hiring, developing the tools and methods to ensure that you have the best recruiting and selection strategies in place. So if you've got, if you're not attracting the best employees, it's going to be more difficult to implement various strategies. Or if you've got, a specific strategy that you're trying to implement, making sure that you're hiring people with the ability to implement that strategy is critical. Similarly, employee training. Keeping employees up to date on the most efficient practices is a way in which a firm can be more efficient. But there's also questions about the efficiency of training. So what training should you do? When should you do it? How should you do it? And is that training really leading to the outcomes that we hope it does? So there's some questions there. And then also this idea of self-managing teams. So this kind of gets to the organizational structure with flatter organizations, that you allow groups or teams to manage themselves. And there's some interesting benefits to that, and one of the biggest is the reduction in administrative costs. If you've got good teams that work together, that don't need much oversight, that don't need much management level support, you're able to produce more with less. The other thing that's very interesting when we think about human resources and motivation, one of the few things that we actually know for certain is that human beings are motivated by money. That if you pay someone to do a task, the more you pay them to do it, the more motivated they are to do the task. The challenge, though, with pay for performance is that it may work too well. So we can imagine that if you pay someone a commission on sales, that they are more likely to be motivated to get more sales, irrespective of the cost of getting that sale. So they might sabotage a fellow salesman in order to get more sales. They might, engage in some marginally unethical behavior in order to get the sale, because you're motivating them, you're paying them for more sales. And so the challenge is with pay for performance is, how do you make sure that what you're paying someone to do is in fact what you want them to do? And that can be particularly challenging. So as we just hinted on, the organizational structure, the way in which an organization is structured, so lines of communication, authority, approvals, all of these are going to affect all of the different functional areas of the firm, and so clearly they're going to have an effect on efficiency. If you can improve cooperation across functional areas, things like reducing mistakes during handoffs, more efficient ways of identifying and exploiting opportunities across functional areas, and reducing tribalism and internal fighting, that's going to lead to a more efficient firm. So, for example, we can think of, an accounting the accounting division identifies an opportunity that requires the development of a new product, so they have to work with the R&D and design folks. Well, if the accounting and R&D folks don't get along, it's going to be more difficult or less likely that that communication occurs. So there's reasons to create a organization-wide culture in addition to kind of the tribal culture that can exist. And the other bit of advice that I would offer is organize to create value, not only maximize value capture. So while there are ways in which reducing R&D and customer service might reduce your operating costs, and in the short term might have direct benefits on profits, that there are long-term implications for those sorts of decisions that we've talked about. So here's a little cheat sheet that's in your textbook on the different ways in which you can create efficiency through various functional areas and the primary ways that those are achieved. Now switching to superior quality. Now quality allows for increase in profits by improving reputation, which has some interesting effects on lowering costs. Firms with higher reputations are more likely to get new customers. It's going to be easier for them to negotiate better prices with suppliers. So there's all sorts of reasons for which having a good reputation might affect a firm that we've talked about when we've talked about non-market strategies. And firms that produce quality goods tend to have higher reputations than firms that are known for producing poor quality goods. Now, higher quality goods also have, they create more value, and they have, reduced defects and errors in production, reducing waste. So this quality turn has a significant effect not only on the outcomes, but also an interesting effect on efficiency. And we've mentioned this briefly before this semester, that there's two ways of viewing quality. We can view quality as reliability and quality as excellence. So starting with quality as reliability, the idea of quality as reliability is producing a product or service that meets the set specifications that you have, and this has kind of gained a great deal of influence and significance with what's been called the quality turn in production, or total quality management. And the idea of this was increasing product reliability to perform consistently as designed and rarely break down. And it's somewhat difficult to imagine now, but really through the 1970s and even through the 1980s in the United States, production facilities, there was quality control was only done at the end of the line. So you would produce a hammer, and out of every 1,000 hammers, you would look at a hammer and see if it was broken or not, and that would give you your quality rate, and as long as it was within sort of a reasonable standard, you were okay. And so this led to a lot of products being sold by American manufacturing firms that would break down, because obviously that form of quality control is going to lead to a lot of errors occurring. But by contrast, what was interesting is that the Japanese manufacturers, who were recovering from World War II as an island nation, they had very limited resources that they could pull on in manufacturing. And so what they said was, we don't want to make a product and then that product be defective and have to throw it away. We want to make sure that every product we make is good, that there's no mistakes along the way, that we want to repair mistakes as they occur. And that's where this total quality management started to gain resonance. And what ended up happening is that, particularly in the automobile manufacturing, is that the Japanese automakers all of a sudden gained this reputation for being reliable vehicles, in contrast to the American cars that were breaking down all the time. And consumers made the switch. They decided that they would rather have a more reliable vehicle. And to boot, what was happening is that the Japanese manufacturing firms were producing vehicles that were less costly to make than the American vehicles, because the American auto manufacturers were still throwing things away. Thinking about how does this work, and this is discussed in far greater detail in other courses, but to give you a general sense of how total quality management works, you're going to have improved quality means that costs decrease. So if you're having to throw out less finished goods, that it's less costly to produce your goods, and you're increasing efficiency. So as a result, productivity improves, and that this better quality leads to higher market share, allowing the company to raise prices. And higher prices increase profitability, allowing the company to stay in business, and ultimately enables the company to create more jobs. Most manufacturing firms in the U.S. have adopted some measure of total quality management, the most famous of which being Sigma 6, but there's a couple of other strategies. But this has now kind of become the standard in manufacturing across the world. Now, the Chinese manufacturers are kind of throwing this out the window and doing things vastly different. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Chinese market with quality either changes or stays the same moving forward. But this is a widely understood strategy now. And the way that total quality management works is that management should strive to eliminate mistakes, defects, and poor quality as they happen. That there's this improvement of quality. Improve the quality of supervision, and that work standards stress quality of work. That employees should understand that they need to produce products to a certain standard rather than producing more at a lower standard. And that employees have to have the skill set in order to make the best product possible. And kind of one of the big things with Sigma 6 or total quality management is a commitment from every individual in the company to achieve better quality, getting that buy-in. The textbook again has another cheat sheet with different functional areas and how they affect reliability. So how different functional areas can increase reliability. Now, quality as excellence, and quality of excellence is achieving the perception of high quality of the product or service, and in order to do that, you have to understand what are the factors that customers feel affect the quality. For example, the quality of a hotel. No customer is going to think about the gauge of the wiring in a hotel to determine if it's a high or low quality hotel. And so using the most expensive gauge wiring is probably not going to affect consumers' perception of value or quality. And so it's important to match areas of investment if you're trying to differentiate on quality with the factors that matter most to potential customers. And so we see a mismatch between that very often, and that's an inefficient use of resources. You also want to design products in such a way that those attributes are embedded into the product. Not leaving these as add-ons or kind of superfluous aspects of it, but centering the product's design and development with the aspects or the factors that customers consider of the most importance. And the other thing is how you sell these things. Making sure that the customer knows about these unique factors. And the other important thing with quality as excellence is recognize that the competition is not stationary. And so if you have this new product that's a top of the end luxury product that out competes all your competitors, you can know that your competitors are likely to implement similar strategies in the future. So we see this all the time in the automobile industry, that a luxury car maker will come out with some new engine or new strategy that is considered better than the competition, and then 6 months later the competition comes up with something similar in mind. So these are not stationary, and that you have to constantly reinvest in and constantly continue raising the bar for what's expected. So it can be a difficult space in which to remain competitive. So that's the lecture for today. Just a quick recap. We started with this idea of increasing value capture and then the role of different functional areas, specifically efficiency. And we looked at the different functional areas and how they affect firm level efficiency. And then we also talked about superior quality, and we ended up with the discussion on quality as reliability and quality as excellence. So for the next lecture, we're going to continue talking about functional level strategies. We're going to be talking about innovation and customer responsiveness. And then we'll also have a discussion about sustainability and corporate social responsibility and how that can affect a firm's ability to create competitive advantage. The deliverables, as a reminder, Quiz 6 is going to be due Friday at 5 p.m. And we also have the exam coming up around the corner. And a question to think about is what happens when areas conflict? So what happens when efficiency and quality are inconsistent with each other? How do you navigate that inconsistency? Well, thank you, everyone. Any questions or comments, please feel free to ask me or ask them on the student question lobby, and look forward to talking with you again very soon.